Hello, I'm Adinsur and this is my Mistweaver guide for patch 6.2.2. Now this spec is completely unique and not just in its gameplay but also in the fact that it is the only healer that is hard to master and hard to play. Every other healer is easy to play and hard to master, and that's not true for the monk, by no means. The problem with that is it requires you to put a lot of effort into every single moment of a raid encounter to achieve the same results as other healers achieve with half that effort. The only redeeming factor of that, and in my opinion the most important one, is that it's simply fun, and it is actually rewarding when you do everything right and when you get the sense of the spec and how it is supposed to flow. So I'll try my best to explain how it works and hopefully some of you will try it out. Starting with the basics. Mistweavers have two resources that they need to manage: mana and chi, similar to paladins' mana and holy power. But there is an extra layer of that management since we have a way to generate mana with a spell called Mana Tea. Every other mana generation in the game has been removed, but this one stayed, and it's integrated into our playstyle in a major way. Without using it, you won't be able to last long in a fight, so it is essential. The way you gain it is by spending chi, and you gain chi by using abilities that cost mana. So you spend mana in order to gain chi, and with that chi you generate mana tea in order to get the mana back. And the circle goes on and on. Much like the circle of life or yin and yang, and I have no idea if that was intentional or not, but the concept goes perfectly with the monk. And if it was on purpose, I got to give props to Blizz. Anyway, that's the main goal of the spec. So now let's look at the spells that generate chi. They all generate one, with no exceptions. There is Surging Mist, the most basic of heals, Renewing Mist, a heal or time spell, Expel Harm, an instacast self-heal, and Spinning Crane Kick, a channeled AoE heal. The most powerful and most important heal of these four is Renewing Mist. When cast, it goes to a target with 3 stacks. Every second it jumps to another injured raid member, leaving 1 stack behind on the first target. Same as Priest's Prayer of Mending, but in a hot form. Now the part where it gets interesting is when Uplift comes into play. Uplift is a relatively weak heal that costs 2 chi and will heal only targets affected by Renewing Mist. So on that note, the only viable level 100 talent is Pool of Mists, which grants you 3 charges of Renewing Mist, and that way you can blanket the entire raid with Renewing Mists if you want, and use Uplift on all of them, if it's needed. At the get-go, we have an opportunity for major mistakes. Since you have to put out all 3 mists quickly most of the time, there is a high chance that you will accidentally put another stack of mists on a target that already has 3 or 2 stacks on them already. And that is really important to watch, more so when you use Thunder Focus Tea, which is a cooldown that increases the number of the next Renewing Mists to 5. So if you make a mistake, you could end up with a situation where only a few people have the hot, even with all 3 charges being used. Now, going back to our primary concern, we don't want to overspend chi or sit idly by and not generate any. You want to be constantly generating and spending chi. Renewing Mist works perfectly for this. Since it has 3 charges, you generate 3 chi when using all of them, and maybe even more. Multi-strike grants your Renewing Mist another charge, or better said, you don't waste any if you proc multi-strike. So you often end up spending 4 or 5 mists instead of 3. So you spend your mists, wait 2 or 3 seconds for them to disperse, and then you use Uplift. By the time you cast 2 Uplifts, you should have 2 more mists to cast, in order to prolong the coverage on the raid, and of course to generate yet 2 more chi for another Uplift. If however you don't have that much multi-strike and it doesn't happen often, there still are the 3 other options for generating chi. Now generally, Expel Harm is the easiest and fastest generator. It costs the least mana and is an instacast. But it doesn't do much, especially if you aren't injured, since it heals only yourself. So the best choice then is to use Surging Mist, but it has a cast time of 1.5 seconds. The faster way to cast it is by using Soothing Mist, and I would suggest to anyone that hasn't tried the Mistweaver to take a breather now, because it gets 10 times as complicated from now on. So, Soothing Mist is a channeled ability that heals for a small amount. The utility of it lies in the fact that it lets you cast Surging Mist instantly while channeling. So if you're fast, you can cast a Surging Mist in less than a second. Not only that, but it interacts with our statue as well. So our statue of the Jade Serpent uses its Soothing Mist, which is as powerful as yours, while you are channeling. But it doesn't follow you and casts on your target, it casts on a random injured raid member. And that then in itself becomes a viable heal. 2 Soothing Mists do a decent amount of healing. Anyway, there is one more way to generate chi, as I mentioned earlier, but it is extremely expensive and only usable when the raid is stacked. Spinning Crane Kick. It costs 14k mana, same as Druid's Wild Growth, so outside of points in the fight when you really don't care about mana, you shouldn't be using the spell. So, we have covered the chi generators and the chi spender Uplift. There is one more chi spender, and that is Enveloping Mist. It is a single target extra powerful hot that costs 3 chi, so one more than Uplift, and it will top off the target unless it's a tank. It also has a cast time, but can be an insta-cast with Soothing Mist. You use that when either there isn't any raid-wide damage, or you don't have Renewing Mist on that target, which can and will happen often. Now, let me go through the talents really quickly, and then we can go back to the rest of our abilities. The first tier is our movement tier. I personally prefer Tiger's Lust over Celerity and Momentum. While Celerity is great for personal use, it is just that, personal. Tiger's Lust can be cast on anyone, and we already have 2 roles, while some other classes like the DKs don't have much or any sprint-like abilities. That's why in every single encounter it is better to take, unless you are using Chi Torpedo. Then Celerity is a healing increase, not just a movement increase, because it lets you cast Chi Torpedo 3 times, and Chi Torpedo heals and damages every time, so keep that in mind and switch accordingly. In the next tier, the only real option is Chi Burst. It gives us another strong AoE heal, which Chi Wave and Sphere are not. They probably do more healing over time in some occasions, but they are too unreliable, and we need more on-demand heals like Chi Burst. Just make sure to be facing to the target you want to heal, and that can be difficult. You have to align yourself behind some ranged or melee in order to hit both groups. If you aren't stacking, that is, then just go behind everyone else and fire away. It works the same way as Priest's Divine Star. The level 45 tree gives us a way to improve our Chi generation, and the only choice in my experience is Chi Brew. I constantly see people using Power Strikes and praising it like it's widely better than Chi Brew. It generates 1 Chi every 15 seconds, while Chi Brew is an on-demand cooldown that gives you 2 Chi and has 2 charges, plus 2 stacks of mana tea, although that's not really important. The main thing here is that as a healer you want to be in control of your spells and actions, not to hope that you get an extra chi when you need it. The main advantage of Power Strikes is that if you are at full chi, it procs and it leaves a chi sphere next to you that you can pick up for 1 chi, and that way you can stack them through the encounter. But the point of the monk is not to be kept with chi. It's to spend it and gain it as fast as possible, but still have reserves ready for big healing, so you won't have that many spheres at any given point in time. And with Brew, you have 2 extra reserves, so it's a no-brainer for me. But then again, I might be missing something, since a lot of people are using it. Admittedly not as many as G-Brew, but it's something to think about. Or search for somewhere else for an answer, because I simply don't know what makes it so special. Moving on to the next tier is our CC tier, and here you can pick what you want, though Leg Sweep is the strongest CC. At level 75, generally you want to go with Diffuse Magic. Most of the time you will be damaged with magic damage, not physical. But Dampen Harm is also a viable option, since it defends from every form of damage and lasts quite a while. And if you aren't experienced in a fight, it's better to use Dampen until you can safely use Diffuse. Now the level 90 tier is kinda weird. It has Zwen, which is a major offensive cooldown, and G Torpedo and Russian Jade Wind, which modify your existing spells. So in PvE you would never take Zwen, so I wonder why it's even there in the first place. The choice is between the other two. Russian Jade Wind improves Spinning Crane Kick and makes it really useful since it isn't channeled anymore. Plus it heals for more. While G Torpedo improves roll and makes it do healing and damage when you pass through players and enemies. Obviously it does less healing than Russian Jade Wind does, but it has 2, or in the case when you take Celerity, 3 charges. Most people, and I as well, prefer Russian Jade Wind, but it's hard not to ignore the potential of Torpedo. When combined, the 3 stacks heal for more than rushing and costs nothing, while rushing is the most expensive spell in the game, at 20k mana. But for that to happen, literally half or the entire raid has to be really tightly stacked, and I mean tight, like 1 or 2 yards. So if you are fighting a boss that requires a lot of people to tightly stack, like Fell Lord, Zakun or Gorfin, Torpedo might be a safe bet. Though if you want to be on the safe side, take Rushing. Finally, the level 100 talents. I mentioned previously that the only option is Pool of Mists, so that's that. In terms of glyphs, there is only one mandatory one in raids, and that is Renewing Mist. I like to use Surging Mist and Soothing Mist for the other 2 talents. Surging basically allows me to heal with Surging while DPSing without having to target anyone, and Soothing just gives more maneuverability. You see, I mentioned DPSing. Well, that is a big part of the Monk gameplay that I left out up until now. Before we get to that though, there are just a few glyphs and spells we need to cover. Detox is a cool passive healing glyph, but I would never replace it with these 3. There isn't much spam dispelling in Hellfire City, outside of maybe the Council. The only glyph I would switch out is Touch of Death, and I have been using it up until recently when I discovered the glyph of Surging Mist. It's really helped me in raids, more so when I was tanking, but I found that spending 3G on it every fight isn't such a big deal anyway. And one more that needs mentioning is Targeted Expulsion. I personally have never used it, but it was deemed as mandatory by a lot of people throughout Warlords of Draenor. I just don't know why. It heals for less than half as much as a Surging Mist does, and it allows you to target another player. Really, you barely notice the heal. Its purpose is to generate 1G quickly. It was never designed to be a viable heal. And plus you are often on lower than 100% HP, so it heals anyway. So now we can get back to the gameplay. We went through the basic spells, and the gist is to maintain balance between the 2 or 3 resources we have, with using Renewing Mist to generate Chi and Uplift when you blanket the raid after it has received damage. Double Soothing Mist is a good way to heal small injuries, and Rushing Jade Wind or Chi Torpedo are good for AoE. Plus you can't forget Chi Burst, as it does a lot of healing and it's free. Enveloping Mist is the quintessential strong hot, so use it on the tanks or people that are really low with dots on them. So what else do we have? We still have two really strong cooldowns. An AoE one called Revival and a single target one called Life Cocoon. Revival has around half the power of a Tranquility, but is an instant cast. So, since hunters lost their aspect of the fox, druids can't move and cast Tranquility anymore, so we have our niche back. We can top the raid off while moving in an instant. The spell is best when combined with an unused trinket if you have it, and Intellect Potion of course. Life Cocoon is a big ass shield that absorbs a bit more than half of the tank's HP if you don't have any procs up, so you can save their lives a lot of the times in a fight, and they might call for it because of that. If not, though, you have to predict the damage they will take and the heals they will receive and use the spell when it's most needed. And you can even use it on other members on fights where the tanks are particularly safe. Okay, now we can go to our second stance, the stance of the Spirited Crane. In the stance you can use spells that are accustomed to any Windwalker monk, and they heal for 50% of the damage they do thanks to our statue. That's called Eminence Healing, similar to Discipline's former way of Atonement Healing. You have Jab to generate Chi, Tiger Palm to do a bit of DPS and more importantly gain an armor piercing buff, Rising Sun Kick, the strongest attack Windwalkers and Mistweavers have, that also increases the damage we do to the target by 20%, and finally Blackout Kick. When used it gives a 20% crit buff for 20 seconds. So the real question here is how to use these spells. Obviously you should use Tiger Palm and Blackout Kick every 15 to 20 seconds and Rising Sun Kick every 10 to 15 seconds to keep up the buffs. But in the meantime it depends on the raid damage. Are there a few people damaged, a little, or just one or two? If there are more, you use Blackout Kick to spend the rest of the Chi, because it heals 4 extra targets for 20% of the damage it does. Now that may not be a lot, so even then using Rising Sun might be better, since it has 3 charges and is around 90% more powerful than Blackout. I often crit 80k with it, even with the shit gear I have, so when I crit 80k it healed someone for 40k, and that's not a little. Obviously for harder parts of the fight it is, but you should use this stance and this form of DPS/healing style when there isn't much damage coming out, so you don't have to worry about that. That way you are part healer, part DPS and are competent at both. Plus, one more benefit of this stance is that you build up stacks of Vital Mists, which reduce the cast time and mana cost of Surging Mist by 20% and stack up to 5 times. So like an Enhancement Shaman, you can have an instant cast heals going out with 20% more crit chance from Blackout Kick and have them cost nothing. Plus, with the Glyph of Surging Mist, you don't have to target anyone, so you don't have to spend time away from the boss. There are still 3 spells that improve our gameplay though. Our only baseline defensive cooldown, Fortifying Brew, it's the same as with the other 2 specs, increases our health by 20% and reduces damage taken by 20%. The strength of it lies in its duration. And then we have Transcendence. It works the same way as Warlock's Portal would work and is incredibly useful in raids and any environment really. You plonk an image down and teleport to it when you want. Then you plonk it at the same spot again if it's needed. Lastly, an overlooked spell by most monks, and for a good reason, Detonate Chi. It detonates all the spheres you passively form while healing. And that's because of your mastery. causing them to heal in a wider radius. But this heal is weak, and in most fights, the raid will pick up these orbs up anyway, or they will detonate them by themselves, without you having to detonate them. For that same reason, you won't have a lot of orbs left anyway at any point in the fight to justify the spell. Though if you really want to, you can use it and see how it works. For me, it hasn't been useful. It is from another time, when monks were able to put spheres where they wanted, and they were far more powerful. Now let's take a look at a typical raid encounter for a Mistweaver, and then we will finish things off with how to gear your monk. Okay, so right before every fight you should always put down your statue, and if there is a need for it, Transcendence as well. Then you use all of the stacks of Renewing Mist and Expel Harm to get 4-3, and as soon as the boss is pulled, switch to the Spirited Crane stance and start DPSing. Obviously keep all 3 buffs from Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick and Rising Sun Kick at all times, and watch for the abilities that are coming up. The 2 debuffs are still weak, so I don't have to do extra healing on them, but the focus is about to go on someone, so I switch back to the healing stance. Just make sure to spend all the chi you have before you do that, or keep one, because only one will stay when you switch. So now I have to put Enveloping Mist on the focused person, and the debuffs are getting stronger. Now the main problem here is that we can't effectively heal the dotted players or the focused players or the tanks, since we don't have an Absorption or a hot healer. We have a Holy Priest, a Restore Shaman and a Mistweaver, but I still have one hot that is really powerful and Cocoon. So that's why I don't go into the DPS stance a lot in this fight. Now I use Life Cocoon on one and Enveloping Mist on the other, and still they almost die when Rip comes. So after Rip it's time to stabilize, since the hardest phase is coming, the shadowy phase. So we have to focus on AoE healing, but the tank is taking a huge amount of damage here. So while I blanket the raid with Renewing Mist and use Uplift on all of them, I still have to actively heal the tanks. And Uplift isn't a ton of healing, but it's the best we have. And since literally no 2 ranged are close to each other, and we have few melee, I don't have the chance to use either Chi Burst or Rushing Jade Wind. And that's why this fight was hard for me to heal. I was lacking options. That's a common thing that happens especially in small raids such as this one. Anyway, we survived that phase without using Revival, so I have that saved for later. So now I just have to watch for the debuffs. This period of the fight has the least damage, so I have time to drink Mana Tea and DPS. Although I don't switch to DPS here, I was too afraid that people might die from the debuffs and some random damage. So I see that the mirror image phase is coming up, and I decide to blanket the raid with Renewing Mist instead of DPSing. And that's a choice you often have to make, and it usually ends up being the wrong choice, unless you're familiar with the fight and with your raid group. This particular raid was well equipped to avoid the swords, so I could indeed have gone into the Spirited Crane stance, but I decided to go with a safe option. As soon as I realized that though, I switched, and that was another bad choice. Now the debuffs are ramping up and I need to heal them, so I switch back fast. Now the second shadow phase is coming, and I have Revival saved for it. It ends up saving the raid, as far as I know. Everyone just took loads of avoidable damage, plus the debuffs were wrecking the 2 people. It would have just been better to dispel them in that situation, but I still have Life Cocoon and I would rather use that than having Reap all over the place. So now the raid just nukes the boss, and that's the fight. Not really an interesting and not particularly hard fight, but it shows you how a monk can save lives with Enveloping Mist and the entire raid with Revival. even though the rest of my spells were severely limited because no one was stacked. First, the stat priority is multi-strike because we get free renewing mists and rising sun kicks, then crit, versatility, haste, mastery. As for the set bonuses, both the 2 set and the 4 set bonuses are really good, the 4 set being better, and they both buff Renewing Mist and Rising Sun Kick, which are the 2 spells you are using the most anyway. Although they don't change our gameplay like the tier 17 ones did, you still should go for the 4 set as soon as possible. And if you have the opportunity to choose, the offset piece should be the chest. The best 2 trinkets are from Xul and Socratar. Strangely enough, the trinket from Archimond, which is usually really powerful, even though not so interesting for the healers, is really weak for Mistweavers. It gives our Soothing Mist an AoE effect, but it's only 33% of the healing done. And that's nothing, since Soothing Mist by itself doesn't do a lot of healing. And even more outrageous is that we don't even use it all that often, as a heal in its own right. It's a filler spell and helps us cast other more powerful spells. So for the first time I would say that the trinket isn't viable. Before I wrap things up, I would just like to mention that I use only one macro for this spec, and it's just a Stance Dance macro. Nothing really special about it. Okay, so that's enough for me. This video went on for far too long. Hope you found this useful and hope it helps someone. Thanks for watching and see you next time.